Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. And I have a show I've been waiting for a number of weeks. You know, we always talk about media and advertising. As a matter of fact, if you watch the show regularly, which we hope that you do, of course, we always talk about how important it is to have the right staff, to have the right people on the train. You know, when we look at venture capital, we look at angel investors, we look at bootstrap companies, the first thing that you really need to think about is your team, because that's the first question anybody's going to ask that looks at your company is, what does your team look like? Who's on the team? Let's talk about the resumes of the people on the team and make sure that's the right group to get you from point A to B for really world domination. So we've been able to invite a real expert on the show on staffing today. His name is Mr. Joe Kaufman. He, of course, is the CEO of Media Staffing, and he has a very interesting niche, a very interesting approach with what he does. He specializes in digital media staffing, and it's really a great and important niche because, of course, without digital media, without advertising, marketing, PR, a company goes nowhere. So Joe is very integral in putting the right people in the right place at the right time for the right companies. And we're very delighted to have Joe on the show today. It's a real honor, Joe, to have you on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Andy.
Yeah, it's super cool to have you. We, of course, we love digital media. We love advertising. We love marketing. It's so interesting. But companies without it, I mean, they go nowhere fast because you just have to get the word out. But let's talk about it. Let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet. Tell us about media staffing, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Media Staffing in a nutshell is a recruitment company that is built around high quality placements in the digital media and overall advertising landscape. So when I started Media Staffing about 10 years ago, my goal and my objective was to really build a company that focused on building, hiring the right candidate at the right time, and really building a better mousetrap than what is out there in the world of recruiting. So I worked at multiple staffing firms, and then I went in-house. And the biggest challenge that I saw was that the candidates that would end up in the hiring manager's inbox were often candidates that were very actively looking. They weren't, they moved around a bit from job to job to job. And I felt like I could build a bit of a better mousetrap that will allow candidates to allow our team to foster relationships and connections with really strong candidates that aren't actively looking, but through our consultative approach, really find them the right opportunity and ultimately lead to better results.
Yeah, I love it. You've done such a great job. The testimonials are remarkable. This business, when we think about it and we pull the lens back as an entrepreneur, as a fellow entrepreneur, and the entrepreneurs watching the show, they might be saying, you know, this is one of those chicken and egg situations, maybe a cart and a horse situation. Which one comes first? So which one comes first? Are you looking and reaching out for the potential high-level candidates, or are you reaching out to the companies that need the candidates, or do you do it both simultaneously?
It's a bit of both. Generally, though, the companies start first, right? They'll usually, they'll come to us and they'll say, hey, we have a pretty sensitive need and a very specific requisite that needs to be filled. And then we'll go out and we'll, in our approach, and we'll be very selective through our network and through our relationships and through, our team, and really hone in on the right candidate and make sure that, we have a very targeted approach. So we are not a volume staffing firm. We are not a firm that throws a ton of resumes and hopes something sticks. We really listen to our clients and what they're looking for, and then line up a very strong list and roster of candidates that are going to be that could be an effective hire. In fact, I'd probably say that we have one of the best industry averages of submittal to offer to placement. And that's what we're really, really good at.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's such a high percentage. And that's what people really want for businesses. If you run a business and you have a company like yours, you really want the best of the best. And like you mentioned, you're very selective on who you let in. So let's talk about that selection process. You have a great team, of course, at Media Staffing. I mean, you've been this sort of expert and leading sort of voice in the industry for a number of years. When we think about it, what types of questions do you ask the potential candidate to make sure they're the right selection?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really, what we like to do, and our approach is a bit different, is, most recruiters, they'll get a job rec and they'll just try to match up the bullet points in the job description and hope something fits. We try to go above and beyond that. So anytime that we're taking on a role, we always like to ask our hiring managers, what has been lacking in the search? What have you not seen from the right candidate? And many times that is actually just not on the job description. A lot of it is really a personality, right? It's like dating. You just have to, everything could be great on paper, but you just have to feel that connection. And that's what we're really good at. We go for that connection, from just being overall knowledgeable in what we're recruiting for. That box we already check. I mean, every recruiter at Media Staffing actually has in-house experience, has media experience, has been on the sales side of the industry. So when we're talking to candidates, we understand we've lived in their roles before. We've had their jobs before. So from a skill set perspective, we'll only have those conversations with candidates that we already know the skill set is there. Our goal is to really find the personality piece and find those intangibles that you can't really tell off of a resume, and hone in on those.
Yeah, I love it. Of course, the media and advertising staffing space. I mean, when we talk about people in media, people in advertising, people in PR and the like, a lot of times they're artsy. They have that art side of the brain, because they have to be creative and think about things. How do you make sure, and you mentioned the matchmaking, I would imagine sometimes, not often, but sometimes there's just not like this psychological connection between possibly the company and the potential new staff. How do you make sure that you really are integrating and introducing and matchmaking the right person with the right psychological profile to the right company?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I wish there was one simple answer. So much so we've had situations where we've had candidates who interview for one team at, let's say, an ad agency, very qualified candidate, and the hiring manager doesn't feel like it's a good fit. And then a different brand, a different team at the agency under a different brand opens up a role, and we'll submit that same candidate, and it's a great fit. And a lot of it is just kind of getting a sense and getting a feeling and really asking a lot of questions to our hiring managers to find out what is their perfect match. And also, we're very open and transparent, where I tell our clients all the time, I don't necessarily expect to find the right candidate on the first one, but if we don't find the right candidate on the first one, let's talk about what didn't work, right? Let's do a deep dive and almost like an audit in terms of tell me everything you liked about the first candidate or the first few candidates and everything that you didn't like. And then we'll pivot accordingly, right? So the search for us is always dynamic. It's always constantly changing. And I think that's what really makes a good recruiter overall, is somebody who's flexible and open to, like, we love constructive feedback because it allows us to just, really get a better candidate and ultimately drive through the ultimate goal, which is the ideal match.
Yeah, I love it. Of course, you're known for the ideal match. And what I love about what you do is very personalized. You have these conversations, you have good communication. Of course, you would expect that in the advertising and, media space with your clients. You have a good conversation, you keep it real. What types of companies reach out to you, Joe? I mean, are we talking about Inc. 100 companies, Inc. 500 companies, startups, venture-backed companies, Fortune 100 companies? What's sort of the sweet spot right now for media staffing?
Another great question. So our clients range. We've worked with Fortune 100 companies. We've worked with 7-person startups. It's a very broad range in terms of, we've kind of staffed across the entire spectrum. Because we are more of a niche staffing firm in general, anything that touches the media, data, advertising, world is our world. So we're pretty open-minded in the clients that we take on. We do have, there are some recruiters that work in media staffing that are really strong with startups, that are really just kind of great at finding that candidate who's going to be in a pillar in that organization. And then we have our fair share of clients and large ad agencies that win an account and they need to hire 15 people within 6 weeks, and we go.
I love it. I love it. I mean, you go.
Both, yeah.
It's fantastic. You mentioned data, and we always talk about data on the show. I know you know that from watching the show so often. Let's talk about it, because when we think about advertising people, we think about media people, I'm wondering, and I'm sure the entrepreneurs watching the show are also asking the same type of question. Are these people now also data experts, or do they have to be data experts to be able to get through the data of the advertising and media buys, or are those two separate types of people for a company to bring in?
I think data continues to be this massive wave in the industry that is only getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're seeing it across the recruiting landscape of hiring managers want candidates that can be a bit more technical and can just go above and beyond, other than if they're in client success or in marketing. They want the data piece. They want the product piece. They want candidates who aren't just relaying over the information, but can really do a deep dive into the information. I would say that is one of our most popular searches, are hiring managers that are looking for that candidate that has the best of both worlds, that is great at account management, great at upselling, great at client success, but also can be in a room full of data managers and data engineers and come up with really a really strong story as well.
Yeah, I love it, Joe. Of course, some companies have these C-level executives called chief of growth or director of growth, and they sort of oversee some of the media and advertising, but they really are integral in the data collection and the data analysis, like you mentioned. Let's talk about the 7-person startup. You mentioned that you do some work with, smaller startups. Do they say, hey, Joe, we can't maybe have somebody full time right now, but we need somebody to come in to sort of help? Or are they looking for a full-time people typically when they engage with media staffing?
Sure. So it depends on what stage the startup is in. And I'll always ask that question when I'm talking to specifically really raw startups or just going kind of through seed funding. Are they looking to just plug a hole for the time being? And do they have a piece of business that is just a 3-month, 6-month type of term? Or is it something where they envision this person really being a long-term fit? And those are two obviously very different conversations. So if they are looking for someone who I can tell, and I think after talking to them really is going to be an integral part in the organization, then of course it's a full-time permanent conversation. However, when someone decides to hire full-time, it's a big commitment, right? You're on the hook for, salaries, staffing fees, training, and really the amount of time and energy and effort that goes into, especially take a 7-person company where, generally the CEO is the hiring manager. Their time is very valuable, and they are spending months and months training this person and ramping this person up. So it is a big commitment. Alternatively, I also work with a company called OpShop, and what they do is they are that plug and play option for someone who's not looking for full time, right? So if somebody is not looking for a full time person, but they want a big piece of business, and they need, and it could be search, it could be social, it could be programmatic, it could be ad ops, and they're kind of figuring out, how am I going to service this client? I need someone today. I need someone immediately. That's what OpShop is really, really good at. It's kind of like the Netflix of on-demand advertising services. If you need 10 hours of programmatic work and someone to come in and manage your ad serving campaigns, great, boom. If you need somebody to come in and do social for a client for 45 days, you have that option as well. So it's a much more flexible type of service that is offered.
Yeah, super cool. Op Shop gives the opportunity to sort of a la carte it out and sort of test some things and get what you need right now. The media staffing, of course, like you said, that's a big commitment, and those big commitments, of course, pay off quite often, especially when a company reaches out to media staffing, Joe, your company, and says, "Hey, we need somebody," and you have a roster of people. Let's talk about your recruiters, because I know you're very proud of them. You have a top-notch team. I mean, they're well respected, well awarded throughout the industry. How important, Joe, is your recruiting team for the success of what you've been able to achieve at media staffing?
Oh, I mean, I give them all the credit. They're amazing. And we have a small team, but a team that is very passionate. We are very much like a family. I think it's just that comfortability that hiring managers and candidates have, that when they talk to one of our recruiters, they feel like they're talking to a coworker, a colleague, which in fact they are. I mean, the average recruiter at media staffing has over 10 years of experience and has worked at ad agencies and advertising platforms and has been in sales and client services. And they really feel this comfortability. It's a very different experience where you're talking to a recruiter that's, a year or two out of school that is just kind of hoping that it's a good match. And I was one of those recruiters. So I can tell you, where you just hope it sticks, but it's a very different style. And especially today, because really we live in a world that has changed drastically in the last 3-4 years, right? So recruiting overall has changed 3-4 years, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. It's a very, very different world and a very different landscape out there. And I'm sure you might have some questions around it, but I'm happy to kind of dive in and talk through some of the obvious changes. And the biggest one is the acceptance to work remote. So prior to the pandemic, rarely did I get a role where clients were, a hiring manager was comfortable with someone being a fully remote employee, right? Maybe there would be some sort of a hybrid model, but generally, whatever the location, we mostly focused, it was, major cities, right? New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. After post-pandemic, and obviously depending on when someone's listening to this interview, the majority of our roles, almost all of our roles, offer at least a hybrid model of 2 to 3 days a week into the office. And then I would say probably 50% of our positions can be fully remote. So what you essentially did was you took companies that were specifically in a city. So let's take Chicago. So they were in Chicago. They were specific in Chicago, and there was a great candidate pool in Chicago, but it's just one city. Now, all of a sudden, they have a plethora of candidates and an abundance and supply of candidates across the US. So what that does is it changes the game. So no longer are you only restricted in one specific candidate pool. You can now have, especially in Chicago where it's a CST time zone and you're kind of flexible on West Coast candidates as well as East Coast candidates. And that has really been the biggest game changer across the entire staffing industry for both clients now having the ability to really recruit and just add a tremendous amount of more supply of candidates that they would not normally recruit for. And then in return, it's candidates who are in, let's say, smaller cities or, spread out around the US. It used to be that they would be very, very limited in terms of the jobs that they can take, because if they're in, North Carolina, they're specifically looking in North Carolina. But now all of a sudden that candidate who's based in North Carolina is getting job offers for companies in New York and San Francisco and LA. So overall, their supply goes up. So it's just an incredible time in the industry right now.
Yeah, Joe, it's fascinating. You really have identified a mega trend. Back in the day, there was a book called The World is Flat. I think the world's a pancake now. I mean, people, like you mentioned, can take a job in New York, but they could be in, maybe North Carolina or Missouri or California, somewhere else. Sure. Let's talk about the differences between age groups. I'm just curious, because you have 20-year-olds that are in the workforce, you have 50-year-olds in the workforce. Is there a different thing that different age groups are looking for? So when you're recruiting, do you have to keep in mind the age category of the people, sort of the generation that they're from, or is that something that we don't think about as a recruiter?
I think everyone thinks about, naturally, we always think about, am I hiring someone that is, if I'm looking for someone for 2 to 3 years of experience, you're generally going to go after a specific demographic that falls into that category, and vice versa. If you're looking for a VP or an SVP or a C-level executive, it's a reverse trend. I think, our approach is, we always like to kind of judge candidates, so to speak, based off of, their resume, as opposed to trying to put them in a box. And of course, you have to be a bit careful, because we live in a world where, somebody who fits a job and has, regardless of how old they are, or regardless of their age, it is an equal opportunity type of industry that we're in, as we should be in. I think the most startling trend, and I think anyone who's been hiring over the last few years, I can tell you that the Gen Z and the millennial type of candidates, they are very transparent in terms of what they're looking for, and they're very transparent in terms of the salaries that they want. So they don't hold back. I think the difference is when I work with candidates who are, more experienced, that have that threshold of 15 to 20 years. It's more of a subtle type of compensation, around compensation and what they're looking for. But the majority of junior candidates that we work with, they go right at it. They wear it right on their sleeve in terms of what they're looking for. So a lot of times we have to have those conversations where we set expectations. We'll tell them, hey, you have a year and a half of experience, and it's great experience, but it's not going to condone a 6-figure salary. Sometimes they understand it, sometimes they don't. But I would say overall, our goal is to really just make sure that the candidate, whether, regardless of where they fall into, that their experience really lines up to what the hiring manager is looking for.
Wow, it's great. I tell you, Joe, you really have your thumb on the pulse of the trends, the mega trends. You understand it. I already know I'm going to bring you back on the show to talk about corporate culture, because I think that would be a fascinating interview to have with you. Let's give back. Let's talk to the entrepreneurs watching the show. And thank you for cutting out some time for me today. I know you're super busy at Media Staffing. And of course, the op shop is blowing off the hook as well. Let's give back to the entrepreneurs that watch the show. Maybe they're having a tough time. Maybe they're younger. Maybe they freeze in the frame. Maybe they're just having a tough time getting through a pothole in the road. What can you share based on your experience, Joe? Give some advice to the younger folk, the younger entrepreneurs that are maybe having a tough time right now to get through and come out the other side smelling like a rose.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a biased answer, but I truly believe in it. It is just hiring the right people. I can't tell you how many companies I've worked with, startups, that had an okay product. I didn't think their product was special, but their people were special. And they became very successful, and they had very successful exits. And I've worked with companies that have had revolutionary products, and they just didn't hire the right way, and it didn't succeed. And so much of what I believe in is not only hiring the right talent, but retaining the right talent and being loyal to your people and being loyal to your employees. And if you're able to do that, and you hire good people and are able to keep them, the opportunity to be successful the probability of being successful is very, very high. So sometimes, my advice to entrepreneurs is you could have the most amazing product and the most amazing idea, but it's nothing without the people executing it, and value the people that are executing it, and you'll be very successful.
Wow, I love it. For the entrepreneurs watching the show, rewind what Joe just said. I mean, rewind the entire interview, but he basically says something that's really interesting and resonates for me with so many people coming on the show, is that you can have a good offering and a world-class team, and you're probably much better off than having this amazing offering with an average team. I mean, I love it so much, Joe. It's great advice. Listen, this has been awesome. I've been waiting to have you on the show. I really appreciate your sort of being a zeitgeist in in looking at mega trends. And of course, you need to be at media staffing. The Op Shop is doing very well as well. I mean, listen, when you're looking at advertising, staffing, media staffing, and the like, I mean, you're at the forefront. So I wanted to thank you, Joe, so much for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight series today. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy.